HOA Karen's daughter stole my ATV. She thought she was above the law, but police proved her wrong. They said nobody could touch her, that she could break every rule, laugh in our faces, and still walk free. But then one night, I heard the sound of my engine roaring in the distance, and when I looked outside, my ATV was gone. The tracks in the dirt led straight to Karen's house, and her daughter was sitting on it like it was her throne. What happened next, nobody in the neighborhood will ever forget. Welcome back to HOA Secrets Uncovered, where the quiet streets of suburbia hide stories darker than you'd ever imagine. My name is Daniel. I live in a cul-de-sac that looks perfect from the outside. White fences, green lawns, and neighbors who smile just a little too wide. But behind those smiles, there are rules, power games, and secrets. And this time, the secret started with the roar of my stolen ATV. I still remember that night like it just happened. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat in your ears. And then, out of nowhere, the sound of an engine shattered that silence. It wasn't just any sound. It was mine. I knew it, because no one else around here had an ATV like mine. The rumble, the growl, the way it echoed against the houses. It was like hearing your own child's voice being stolen in the dark. I rushed to the window, and my stomach dropped. The driveway was empty. My ATV was gone. I ran outside without even putting on shoes. The night air was cold, biting against my skin, but I barely felt it. All I could see were the muddy tracks cutting through the grass, leading away from my yard, like a trail left on purpose. And when I followed those tracks with my eyes, they stopped right where I feared they would. At Karen's house, her porch light flickered like it was mocking me. And then I heard it, laughed. Her high-pitched, careless, cruel laughter. And there she was, Karen's daughter, riding my ATV in circles on their front lawn, like it was her personal toy, like it had always belonged to her. She saw me standing there, and she didn't even stop. She revved the engine louder, smirked, and shouted across the yard, "You can't do anything. My mom's on the board." The words hit harder than the cold air. She wasn't just stealing my ATV, she was stealing the rules, the order, the fairness of this neighborhood. She was saying out loud what we had all known silently for years. Karen and her daughter thought they were untouchable. I stood there frozen for a moment, not because I was scared, but because I was furious. My fists clenched at my sides, nails digging into my palms. I wanted to march right over and rip her off that seat. But Karen was already there, leaning against her front door, arms crossed, smug smile painted across her face. Her eyes met mine, and she didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't even pretend to care. She just tilted her head and said, almost sweetly, "Drop it, or you'll regret it." And just like that, the game had begun. The next morning I walked outside hoping maybe, just maybe, it had been a bad dream. But the deep tire marks on my grass told the truth, and the mud splattered against my fence was proof she had been there. My ATV was still gone. I checked my door and found something waiting for me. A letter. The HOA letterhead printed bold across the top. My hands shook as I opened it, and when I read the words, I almost laughed at the insanity. They were fining me for parking a recreational vehicle improperly, the very vehicle they had stolen. They were fining me for it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just theft. This was power. This was control. Karen and her daughter weren't just mocking me. They were daring me to fight back. I stood there on my porch, holding that letter, and for the first time I smiled, because I knew something they didn't, if they wanted a war. I was ready. That whole day the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. I saw curtains shift when I walked down the street, neighbors leaning in to talk but stopping when I came close. Everyone knew what happened, but nobody wanted to be the one to say it out loud. Because in this neighborhood, you didn't cross Karen. But I wasn't like the others. I had lived here long enough, seen enough, and I wasn't about to let a spoiled girl and her power-hungry mother run me into the ground. I set up cameras. I checked every corner of my yard, every angle of the street. If they wanted to play dirty, I would play smart that night, just like before. The sound of my engine filled the air, but this time, I caught it on tape. Her daughter laughing, tearing across the road, Karen clapping from the porch like it was some parade. I watched from the shadows. Every second recorded, every smirk captured in full color. I didn't move, I didn't shout, I didn't let them see my rage, because patience was my weapon now. And here's the thing about people who think they're untouchable. They get careless. They believe too much in their own lies, and that's when they fall. I didn't know exactly how this would end, but I knew one thing. It was only the beginning. And soon, everyone in the neighborhood would see Karen and her daughter for who they really were. But here's what I want to know from you. If you were standing there that night, watching your neighbor's daughter ride off with your ATV, would you have confronted her right there in the street, or waited in silence like I did, letting the trap close around her slowly? Tell me in the comments, because this story is just getting started. The next morning, the sun came up like nothing had happened. Birds sang, sprinklers ticked across perfect lawns, and kids rode bikes down the street like we lived in some picture-perfect magazine neighborhood. But all I could see was the deep cut in my grass, the muddy scars across the driveway where my ATV had once stood. I tried to drink coffee and ignore it, but the bitterness in my mouth wasn't from the coffee. It was from the sight of Karen's house sitting smug across the cul-de-sac. Her curtains were wide open, her car polished, her porch swept clean. It looked innocent, but I knew better. Behind those white curtains was rot. Karen wasn't just another neighbor. She was the kind of person who smiled with her mouth, but not her eyes. The kind of person who volunteered to lead every committee, not to help, but to control. The HOA was her kingdom, and every homeowner here was her subject. Some bowed, some hid, but no one dared to challenge her, except me. I looked at the letter again, the fine taped to my door the night before. The words burned into my mind. Violation 4.6, improper parking of recreational vehicle. It was laughable. My vehicle was stolen. Yet somehow I was guilty. That was Karen's way. Turn the truth upside down until it made her look powerful. I wanted to march over and tear that letter in her face. But something told me to wait. I knew if I moved too fast, I'd lose. So instead, I started with small steps. I walked the neighborhood that day, not for exercise, for observation. Every house I passed had a story. Mr. Reynolds' roses cut too tall. He'd been fined last summer. Mrs. Lopez's Christmas lights left up in February. Another fine, even the Johnsons, who painted their shutters the wrong shade of beige, were forced to pay and repaint. Everyone had been punished for the smallest slip. Everyone. Except Karen. Her grass grew higher than the rules allowed. No fine. Her garbage cans sat out all week. No fine. Her daughter blasted music from the driveway at midnight. No fine. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a shield. Her seat on the HOA board protected her from everything, and now her daughter wore that shield too as I walked. Neighbors peeked at me from behind curtains. Some gave small nods. Some looked away. They knew what happened. They always knew. But no one would speak up. And that silence made my blood boil more than anything. Later that evening, I sat in my garage staring at the empty space where my ATV used to sit. It wasn't just a machine to me. I had saved for years to buy it, every extra shift, every late night at work. I had poured into that one thing. It wasn't luxury. It was my freedom. The way I cleared my head after long weeks. The way I explored trails beyond the neighborhood fences, and now it was gone. Stolen. Laughed at. Destroyed in plain sight. I picked up my phone and looked at the footage from the cameras I'd installed. There she was again, Karen's daughter, riding it through the cul-de-sac like a queen on a throne, spinning donuts in the grass, neighbors watching from a distance but doing nothing, Karen clapping her hands like it was a show. The sight made my jaw tighten, but it also gave me fuel, because now I had proof. The following day, I caught Karen in the street. She was walking her little dog, the one that barked at everything but never shut up. She wore her usual outfit, bright sweater, oversized sunglasses, like she was too important for the rest of us. I blocked her path. "Where's my ATV?" I asked. I kept my voice calm, too calm. She smirked before I even finished speaking. "Oh, that old thing? My daughter's just borrowing it. I'm sure you'll get it back." Borrowing. The word echoed in my head like a curse. Borrowing. Like it belonged to her to lend out. Like I was a guest in my own life. "You'll regret pushing this," she said softly. Then she tugged her dog's leash and walked away without another word. Her perfume lingered in the air long after she was gone, and all I could smell was arrogance that night. My cameras picked up something worse. Karen's daughter wasn't just riding my ATV anymore. She had friends with her, 3 of them, all laughing, all taking turns, revving the engine, cutting across people's lawns, tearing the peace of the neighborhood into shreds, and I sat there in the dark, recording every second. Neighbors came out of their houses, some shouted, some shook their heads, but when Karen stepped outside, the shouting stopped. One look from her, and they all went back inside, like soldiers retreating from a losing battle. I realized then, it wasn't just my fight. Everyone wanted her stopped, but no one had the courage to be the first. That courage was going to be mine. I saved the footage. I organized the clips, every spin of the tires, every reckless ride, every smirk on that girl's face, all neatly documented. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I would need it. When I finally shut off the computer and looked outside, the street was quiet again, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the quiet of people holding their breath, waiting to see who would break first, me or Karen. And standing there in my darkened living room, I promised myself one thing. It wouldn't be me. But here's what I want to ask you. If you were living in this neighborhood, where the HOA protected one family above all others, and no one dared to speak against them, would you stay silent like the others? Or would you risk everything to fight back like I did? The first time I confronted them face to face, I already knew it would not end quietly. It was late afternoon when I heard it again, that roar, that growl of my engine, tearing down the street like thunder. I stepped outside and there she was, Karen's daughter, riding my ATV straight down the middle of the cul-de-sac, not even pretending it was hers. She saw me watching and instead of stopping, she sped up. The tires spit gravel into the air as she whipped past my driveway. Her laughter rang out like a knife against my ears. I couldn't hold it anymore. I walked across the street, straight toward Karen's house. The heat of my anger carried me with every step. Neighbors peeked from behind their blinds. Everyone knew what was about to happen, but no one dared to step outside. Karen was waiting for me, as if she knew I was coming. She leaned against her porch rail, arms folded, smug smile glowing in the late sun. Her daughter parked my ATV right in their yard, leaned back on the seat, and smirked like a queen on her throne. "Well, look who finally showed up," Karen said softly. Her voice was sugar-coated poison. "Come to admire how good it looks on her." I clenched my fists, but forced my voice calm. "That's mine, and you know it." Her daughter cut in before she could answer. "You can't do anything. My mom runs this neighborhood, so back off." The words were sharp, but the smile on her face was sharper. I turned my eyes back to Karen. "Give it back. Now." She tilted her head like she was studying a child. Then she laughed. That laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse. Soft. Mocking. As if I was the one embarrassing myself. "You're playing a dangerous game," she whispered. "You don't want to regret this." The tension in the air was so heavy you could almost feel it press against your skin. Her daughter revved the engine beneath her as if to punctuate her mother's words. The growl of the motor mixed with Karen's smirk until my chest burned with fury, but I didn't shout. I didn't move. I just stared into her eyes and let silence answer for me. Finally, I turned and walked back across the street. I could hear their laughter behind me, mocking, echoing down the cul-de-sac. They thought they had won. They thought I was weak. But what they didn't know was that silence was my weapon. That night, I reviewed the camera footage again. Every second of her reckless joyride, every threat dripping from Karen's lips, every smirk frozen in time. It played back on the screen like a movie. But this movie had no happy ending for them. The longer I watched, the more I realized this wasn't about an ATV anymore. It was about control. Karen didn't just want to take my property. She wanted to break me, to make me bend, to show the neighborhood that she was untouchable and I was powerless. But that wasn't going to happen. The next day, I saw her daughter again. This time with friends. 3 of them piled onto my ATV. It was reckless, stupid, dangerous. The machine wasn't meant to carry that many. They swerved in wild circles, cutting across lawns, laughing as sprinklers toppled and dirt sprayed into the air. Children screamed and ran inside. Parents yelled from porches, but Karen only smiled from her steps. Sipping a glass of wine like it was entertainment, I recorded it all, every second. And when her daughter finally saw me holding my phone, she shouted across the street, "You can film all you want. Nothing will happen to me." Her voice dripped with arrogance, and the worst part was, she truly believed it, because so far, nothing had. That evening, I decided it was time to test her. I walked across again. Neighbors peeked through their blinds, their silence buzzing like invisible chains. Karen was in her yard, clipping flowers that didn't even belong to her. She'd plucked them from Mrs. Lopez's garden 2 doors down. Her daughter lounged on my ATV, feet kicked up on the handlebars, like she was daring me to act. "Do you ever teach her respect?" I asked flatly. The words slipped out like a blade. Karen didn't even look up from her flowers. "Respect is earned, not demanded," she said calmly. And then she added with a little smirk, "And around here, you haven't earned it." Her daughter laughed, tossed her hair, revved my engine again. Something in me snapped. I stepped closer. Karen's dog barked wildly, but I didn't flinch. I pointed at the ATV. "This ends now. Give it back, or I will make sure you regret every second of this game." For a brief flicker, I saw her smile fade, but only for a second. Then she laughed again. "You think you can fight the board," she said. "You think anyone will take your side? Against me?" She leaned closer, her voice soft enough that only I could hear. "You're not fighting me. You're fighting the whole neighborhood." Her daughter shouted again, "You can't win." And that was it. I turned and walked away, not in defeat, but in patience, because deep down, I knew something they didn't. The higher they flew on their arrogance, the harder the crash would be when it came. That night, I saved every clip, every picture, every shred of proof. I didn't know exactly when I'd use it, but I knew the moment would come, and when it did, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. But let me ask you this. If your neighbor's daughter sat smugly on your stolen ATV, laughing in your face, daring you to act, would you have exploded right then and there? Or would you have stayed silent like I did, waiting for the perfect strike? The letter came at dawn. I opened my door to grab the paper, and there it was, a crisp white envelope. The HOA seal stamped across the front like a warning. My chest tightened before I even opened it. I knew it wasn't good. I tore it open with shaking hands. And the word almost made me laugh. Violation 6.3. Disturbing the peace with unauthorized vehicles. Fine, $250. Additional fine for repeat violations. $500. I read it twice. 3 times. My ATV was stolen. My driveway sat empty. Yet somehow the board was fining me for disturbing the peace. It was madness. It was also Karen. I could almost see her handwriting behind the printed words, her smirk written between every line. This wasn't about rules. This was about breaking me. I stood on my porch holding that letter while the neighborhood came to life. Sprinklers hissed, dogs barked, cars pulled out for work. And I wondered, how many of them had seen her daughter riding my ATV all night long? How many of them had heard the roar of the engine, the screams, the laughter? And yet here I was, the one paying the price, by mid-morning. Another letter came. This one slid right under my door. No envelope, just a single page, handwritten. It read, "Stop making trouble. You won't win. A friend." The handwriting was shaky, almost disguised, but I knew. I knew it came from one of my neighbors. Someone too afraid to say it to my face. Someone who wanted me to give up before Karen destroyed me. I crumpled the note in my fist and threw it in the trash. Because the truth was, I wasn't scared of Karen. I was angry, and anger is harder to silence than fear. That night the engine roared again, but this time, louder than ever, Karen's daughter was riding with 2 boys hanging onto the back. They sped past my house, the tires tearing into the road. Neighbors came out on their porches, shouting, yelling. One man even waved his fist in the air, but the moment Karen stepped outside, the shouting stopped. She didn't even say a word. She just looked at them, and like obedient pets, they all went back inside. That was the power she held, the power of fear, but not me. I didn't go inside. I stood in the yard, filming every second. When her daughter saw my phone, she revved the engine harder and screamed across the street, "You're wasting your time! Mom says you'll pay before I ever do." Karen laughed. She actually laughed at the sight of her daughter stealing and destroying my property. And in that laugh, I heard the truth. This wasn't going to end with letters or warnings. This was war. The very next morning, the war got louder. Another letter from the HOA. This one thicker. Inside were photos. Photos of my yard. My trash cans pulled an inch too far from the curb. A weed sticking through the fence line. A garden hose left coiled in the wrong corner. Each violation came with a fine. $50, $100, $75. They were nickel and diming me into the ground. And I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen wasn't just stealing my ATV anymore. She was trying to drown me in paper cuts, one fine at a time. But here's the thing. Every letter, every photo, every fake violation, I kept them all, filed them neatly, because the more rope Karen gave me, the tighter I was going to pull it around her by evening. Things escalated again, this time not with letters, but with whispers. I went out to grab the mail and saw 2 of my neighbors talking by the sidewalk. The moment they saw me, they stopped. They didn't wave, didn't smile, just turned and walked away. Later I heard them through my open window. "She should just drop it," one said. "She's going to make it worse for all of us," the other whispered back. "Worse for all of us." That was Karen's true weapon. She didn't just scare individuals, she scared the whole neighborhood into silence, because if one person resisted, everyone paid, and now, I was the one resisting that night. I sat in the dark of my living room staring at the pile of letters, each one heavier than the last. The sound of my ATV's engine echoed faintly in the distance. Her daughter was still out there, still mocking me, still untouchable, but in my hands, I had proof. The footage, the letters, the fines, the fear, and for the first time since this began, I felt something shift, not in the neighborhood, not in Karen, but in me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was building a case. The question was, when to strike. If I went too early, Karen would twist it against me. She'd make me the villain. She'd drag me through HOA meetings, smear my name, bury me in more fines. But if I waited too long, her daughter could destroy my ATV completely, or worse, someone could get hurt, because let's be honest, that machine wasn't a toy. It wasn't meant to carry 4 reckless kids at once, and every time she flew down the street at full speed, I saw the disaster waiting at the corner, a crash, a scream, blood on the pavement, and part of me wondered if that was what it would take for this neighborhood to finally wake up. I leaned back in the chair, staring into the dark, asking myself the question over and over, do I move now? Or wait? Do I keep gathering proof? Or slam the hammer down tonight? My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. It read, "You're being watched. Stop before you disappear." No name, no clue, just a warning. I set the phone down. The choice was clear now. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was survival. But let me ask you this. If your HOA turned against you with fake violations and endless fines, while the thief sat protected by the board, would you fight back with proof like I did? Or would you pack up, leave, and run from the nightmare altogether? The warning text wouldn't leave my mind. You're being watched. Stop before you disappear. The words glowed on my phone screen like a curse. I stared at them long after the message vanished into silence. Who sent it? Why me? How deep did Karen's reach really go? I sat in the dark, my living room heavy with shadows, the faint sound of the stolen ATV still echoing in the distance. Each roar of the engine felt like an insult, a taunt, a reminder that Karen's daughter owned the night while I was trapped in fear. But fear can only go so far. At some point, it breaks, and for me, that night was the breaking point. The plan came to me simple, brutal, perfect. If Karen wanted to play games, I'd set the rules. If her daughter wanted to joyride on my stolen property, I'd make sure the right people saw it, not just neighbors, not just board members, but the police, the ones she couldn't laugh at. I pulled my old security cameras out of storage, wires tangled, lenses dusty. I set them up around my yard like watchful eyes, one facing the street, one catching my driveway, one hidden near the mailbox. By sunrise, my home looked ordinary, but I knew every angle was covered. Every engine roar would now be recorded, and this time, there would be no denial. The following night, the bait was set. I left my porch light on, just dim enough to make it look like I wasn't watching. I sat inside by the window with my phone in my lap, camera app open, finger ready to hit record. Midnight came, then 1. The neighborhood slept in silence, and then it began. The familiar growl of the ATV cut through the dark, louder, closer, until it burst past my house, her daughter screaming with laughter, 2 boys clinging to the back like it was a carnival ride. The tires skidded, sparks flying as they scraped the curb, neighbors' lights flicked on, curtains twitched. But like always, no one stepped outside, no one but me. I walked straight to the curb with my phone raised high, recording everything. The headlight blinded me for a second before the machine swerved and circled back. She stopped right in front of my house, her smirk glowing in the harsh beam. "You really don't get it, do you?" she yelled. "This is mine now." I didn't reply, didn't argue. I just held the camera steady. One of the boys shouted, "She's filming us!" But the girl only laughed. "Good, let her. Mom says she can record all she wants. No one will believe her." And with that, she revved the engine and tore down the street, sparks and smoke trailing behind her. But this time, I had it. Every second, every reckless scream, every face clear in the headlights, and I wasn't the only one watching. A car pulled slowly around the corner just as they disappeared down the street. Black and white, the red and blue lights still dark. But I knew exactly who it was. The police. I don't know if a neighbor finally cracked and called them, or if someone higher up wanted proof before acting. But fate had finally placed a witness on my side. I lowered my phone and whispered to myself, "Got you." The next morning, another envelope came, this one heavier than the rest. The HOA seal stamped in angry red, inside. 3 more violations, one for improperly placed lawn decorations, one for unapproved exterior lighting, and one that made me laugh out loud, loitering on public sidewalks. Apparently, me standing on my own curb to film the theft of my property was now a violation. I sat at the table reading the letter with shaking hands, but this time, I wasn't scared. This time, I had leverage, because while Karen used her paper power to crush me with fake rules, I had the real power, the kind that comes with video evidence and flashing lights. Later that day, I got a knock at the door, not a letter, not a neighbor's whisper, a knock. I opened it to find 2 officers standing on my porch. They didn't smile, didn't waste time. "Sir, we need to ask you some questions about a vehicle reported in your neighborhood," one said. I went home with those words echoing in my ears, violent. Could it come to that? Could a stolen ATV and a power-hungry HOA board really lead to something darker? I didn't have long to wonder that afternoon. I came home from work and found the side of my house sprayed with red paint, big letters dripping down the wall. Rat. The smell of chemicals still hung in the air, fresh, recent, done in daylight when neighbors surely saw. But chose silence once again. I cleaned what I could. But the stain stayed, like a scar I couldn't scrub away. And yet, part of me smiled. Because the more Karen lashed out, the more proof I gathered, and the more proof I had, the stronger my case became. That night, the neighborhood wasn't quiet anymore. It was restless. Dogs barked, windows opened, and somewhere in the dark, I heard Karen's daughter screaming again. But this time, it wasn't laughter. It was rage. She stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac yelling at her friends. "You don't get it. My mom's handling it. She said that loser will regret ever calling the cops." Her voice cracked. Her bravado was slipping. And for the first time, I realized something. Maybe they weren't as untouchable as they thought. Still, the warning from the officer burned in my head. Desperate people make desperate moves, and Karen was running out of moves. The real question was, how far would she go to protect the illusion of power she built in this neighborhood? Would she settle for threats and vandalism? Or would she take it somewhere darker? That night, I double-locked my doors, checked every window twice, sat with the lights off listening to the hum of the cameras recording outside, and for the first time in weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being hunted. But let me ask you something. If you were in my place, and your powerful neighbor began to lose control, would you stay and fight back harder? Or would you pack up and leave before things turned truly dangerous? The night the storm finally broke, the sky was heavy with thunder. It felt like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting, watching, knowing something was about to snap. And deep down, I knew it too. Karen had pushed, clawed, and threatened for weeks. But power built on fear doesn't last forever, and when fear dies, the empire falls. I was sitting in my living room when it happened. The roar of my ATV shook the street again. Only this time, it wasn't joyrides or laughter. It was chaos. I stepped outside and saw her daughter racing down the cul-de-sac at full speed, her hair whipping in the wind, two friends clinging to the back, screaming as the tires spat gravel into the air. Neighbors opened their doors, some yelled, some ducked back inside. And then it happened. The ATV swerved too sharp, the back wheel clipped the curb, and the whole machine tipped on its side with a sickening crash. Screams tore through the night. Metal screeched against asphalt, and when it finally stopped sliding, silence filled the air. I ran forward, so did others, for once. The neighborhood didn't hide. The girl was shaken, bruised, but alive. Her friends scrambled up, bloody and panicked, and in that moment, flashing red and blue lights lit up the street. The police had been waiting. 2 cars pulled in fast, doors slammed, officers rushed forward shouting commands. Her daughter tried to argue, tried to laugh it off like always, but this time, there was no escape. The cuffs clicked around her wrists as her screams echoed through the neighborhood and behind the officers. I saw her, Karen. She stormed out of her house barefoot, screaming at the cops. "You can't do this! She's a minor! We'll sue you all! This is harassment!" But the officers didn't flinch. They had the footage. They had the reports. They had witnesses. And now, they had a crash site as undeniable proof. For the first time, Karen looked powerless.